of the things that you will notice when you sit at the NATO table is there's one phrase that keeps repeating, and that is that the biggest mistake for the commander is to prepare to fight the last war and miss the next war. And I think that is really important lesson to everyone, but most notably for those that are working with cybersecurity, digital security, and information space. Because today's environment is already different than yesterday's environment because of technological advance, and tomorrow will be even more different. I think that is very interesting to follow the digital aspects, information aspects of the war of Ukraine, and it is very important to take the lessons learned from that. But I would always caution the idea that the next conflict we're going to see will be the same. What is, in our eyes, what is the key transformation element of the new ways the conflict, crisis, and war is going to happen? First, war has always been about attempting to change the behavior of the other party. We've always attempted to do so through violence, but as our knowledge of human beings, societies increase, as our technology ability to reach into the other societies also increase, we're increasingly talking about not only change of behavior through violence, but also changing the behaviors through issuing a number of signals to the opponent in the military conflict to enable this behavior change. And if we think of some of the current new technologies that are coming in, we see that pattern develop. Think of the US election campaigns, how they are done these days. These are basically big data-based micro-targeted campaigns for the groups of the electorate that are as small as 5 people, which 5 to 7 years ago would not be conceivable. But that's the technology-enabled change that has transformed the way we can communicate, influence people's behaviors. And that is really important to remember. Because as we see the technological and digital aspects of our lives become all-encompassing, Minister just gave an excellent view of how Ukraine has approached it by making its services interaction with the government digital. But also so many aspects of life are becoming digital. And that is the case also here in Finland, that is the case in the Baltic states. But with that follows the security risk. If you think from a malign, bad guy's perspective, at the moment something is becoming important for individual, for the society, for the government, that's an area where you can attack. And the shift that we see happening is the attack not only for disruption of a given service, but an attack to have impact on the cognitive space, on how people perceive. So Minister alluded to a number of cyber attacks being simultaneous with the information attacks. And I would argue some of the attacks have been designed to have an information space effect, to create panic, fear, and downgrade the morale in the society. And that is where we have to follow through on the way this evolution is happening, and also shift the way we are thinking about securing individuals, societies, groups within the society, and the government within that new context. So what I say is really important is we have to have a comprehensive approach to the digital cybersecurity. And what I find when I look at the way we in the West, also that is true still for NATO, where we compartmentalize, sorry, also slip, cyber there, information is there, kinetic is there, something else is there, and we live in the these stovepipes. It is not the way it happens in real life. And although I agree with the minister, Russia tends to be a paper tiger, but you can't build a strategy on your opponent being sloppy. But if you think about how they intend to do that, they're merging all of those effects together. If you look at a Russian information security strategy, that is basically saying the same thing. The cyber and information space is the same, and they operate for the same goal. And that is when we see the operation in the digital space, that is what is underlined by the way they behave. So that is the reality today. But let us try to see where is that all going into the kind of foreseeable, as much as we can, future. So one of the things, and I think the biggest shifts we have seen, is the emergence of value of data for many types of technologies, for the way we run governments, and etc. So it's not only about hardware, software, and network, it's also what's in there. What is the data and the value of that? If I was actually once asked somewhere in the public format, what kind of company is Meta? And to me, the answer is, it's a big data company. Because that's the core value of their business model. And that is, as you see of all of these, most of these big tech, their core value added is the data that they have. And I think that is the way we have to think increasingly about that, what flows within that digital space. And I would go as far as to claim that data is the power of 21st century. Because as many of you, I'm sure, know, also the quality of other technologies like AI depend highly on the quality of data that is accessible and what kind of a data can be accessed. And that is where I believe some of the future elements of the warfare and crisis and conflict will happen. Here I want to draw your attention to a few of our own Center of Excellence experiments to shed the light of some of the ways we can think about risks emanating from data. So first thing, I'm sure everybody in the audience is already crystal clear that privacy is gone. Like, we don't have privacy these days. Although it's not a kind of easy concept to contemplate, but I think that is something that would be very clever for everyone individually, but also as a society to recognize. And I want to bring one of our experiments in a center to illustrate the case. And that was, I think that was 2 years ago, where we had this question. Can we buy from a data broker's data set that gives us a knowledge who are the people that work in the security services of Latvia? And, you know, every day of a year, that is highly classified information in any government. That's not the thing that you're supposed to know for the wider public, and you don't want it to be widely spread. So our question was whether a different approach to this space would give us this insight. So we went out and looked whether any data brokers companies, so these are the companies that they buy data from our app providers and then correlate into the data sets, and typically are bought by the marketing companies, but not only. So we asked whether we can buy some data about people in Latvia. It was not an easy exercise, and the good thing was, because of small language, small market, data set was not really very detailed. But we managed to get to buy data sets of 100,000 Riga inhabitants, basically their GPS location data and the history of it. And then with add-on elements that we had at our disposal, the technology and the skill sets, we basically said, yes, we can earmark those people who work in security services of Latvia, where they live, what is their family, where the family go to their jobs or to schools, and what do they do in their free time. And that was actually the data broker that was outside of a legal remit of Latvia or, for that matter, EU. And nobody, unless we've gone public and talked about the risks of it, nobody would have known that we've gone and gained that kind of data. And that's just to illustrate the kind of lack of privacy we have. The other element on data that I want to share is another experiment we've done even further back in past 4 years ago. And that was the question whether the data allows you to change what people do in real life situations. Is it really enough to change the behavior of people if you have the data about them? And what we tried, we were the red team in a military exercise in Latvia. So supposed bad guys. And our task as a team was to see whether, A, we can know from digital space who takes part in the military exercise, and then see whether we can, based on that as well as the data that is available about these people, change their behavior in a military exercise. So, long story short, we were able to get 15% of exercise participants only through digital space, name, surname, rank, and etc. And then we scraped open source internet, basically, for what kind of data we can correlate to these people. And that was no hacking of phones and etc. So no per se illegal activity. And some of the data came back quite rich. So we attempted to see whether we can change what soldiers do during a military exercise, and we were able to make professional soldiers briefed on information security to disobey orders, leave the positions they're supposed to defend, reconnaissance units to reveal their GPS locations at the time we wanted. Just from understanding from a data set how they think as humans, what they are, what they believe, what they trust, what they do like, what they don't like. And from that understanding, kind of issue the, what we called effect that shifted the behavior. Of course, that was a small scale, limited. But I think if we think about the kind of dynamic of the technology, that is where we're going. And that is where we will be ending at some point in time, sooner rather than later. That big data that is kind of identifiable with an individual, combined with a kind of efficient AI systems, will enable manipulation and behavior change of larger masses of people. And the technology is being fine-tuned as we speak, both in a kind of election setup, but also in some authoritarian systems for citizen control setup. So that is the possibility that we have to take into consideration, that in the next phase of war, that will be increasing reality. And if we think in the terms of a conflict as a behavior changing kind of centric operation, this will becoming preeminent. This brings back me to the idea, the data being the power of the 21st century. And then think of the societal data of Finland. Is there a knowledge where that societal data travels? Where is it stored? If somebody, as we speak, is actively accessing that data, and for what reason. These are current realities. These are not future. Of course, the effect you can do with that is not like full-scale set behavior change yet, but it might come. So that is, I think, the one big thing that we have to concentrate on. The other thing, and I think that is also very much coming as a lesson learned from the war in Ukraine, there probably snippets. But this idea that as the Internet of Things sets in, all things physical have a digital imprint. And okay, so what's wrong with that? What's the problem? But when you think about that in conflict and crisis or war scenarios, it has a profound effect. I love this small story. I don't know whether you've heard about this, but the way Ukraine came up with the idea how to use Tinder for artillery fire direction. I think that's just ingenious. So the story is that obviously, as it happens, when the Russian invasion started, Ukrainian women started to see the Russian military profiles in their Tinder. And Tinder has a feature that gives the distance. So the idea was set up that instead of one can run multiple Tinder accounts and geolocate across different locations. So when you have to see the same profile pop up across those 4 or 5 accounts, basically giving the distance to that individual, you can triangulate. And of course, what military do, they do their Tinder profiles in uniforms. So it's not a brainer who is what you see, and of course they also have the insignia. And of course you would typically have at least a third of a unit on Tinder. So you'd basically be able to geolocate units. And basically, as I understand, that was used for artillery fire direction. So one takeaway is obviously Tinder's a very dangerous app. But more seriously, I think that's a snippet of what is the way we are starting to see the change of our ability by scraping or using the digital to establish the physical and use it in our advantage in a conflict. And that is, I think, something that will be a big part of the future conflicts. And that is the one that has a capacity from that digital establish the physical reality will have a dominance in the battlefield. And that will per kind of military and kinetic action, but has also, remember these data importance, it will have also on the cognitive scale a significant ability to dominate. The other interesting thing that I look back at war in Ukraine, and I think we all have to take away as a big takeaway, and we've not thought, in my view, a lot about it, and that is what kind of apps or platforms our people use for information consumption. We kind of always thought, okay, well, someone used Facebook, poor lad. Somebody uses Twitter, somebody does YouTube, somebody does TikTok. It's just like, entertainment, infotainment with a bits of pieces. But as we see in a conflict, one thing that I can give as a kind of kudos to most of the Western companies that are typically very bad about information manipulation management in their own platforms is they're really trying to step up their work in Euro-Atlantic area during the war. They limited the Russian impact. But can we say the same about every platform? not necessarily. And in fact, you could see the kind of trend where the value set of those who are in charge of a platform was very important on what kind of restrictive measures for the kind of Russian activities were put on those platforms. That's one part. But then imagine then some hostile government has a backdoor into the given platform. And you have a third of your society actually consuming information in that app or platform. They can manipulate what they see, but also they would have direct data from your society basically 24/7. That can be leveraged in conflict, in war, in so many ways. And I don't think we've seen that really emerge full scale in this war. Probably this information part, but not the data part, fully, I think at least. Or we haven't found any evidence on that. But if I think about the next conflict, and when we are in a conflict with the country that has, control of 3 or 4 apps that are kind of widely used in our own society for different reasons, but also for information consumption, we've run a deep, deep risk that might be exposed in especially first phases of war. So my point is, have we built defenses? We've once again have complacently thought that we live in the world of internal peace, which is a typical thought. We kind of always project the past knowledge into the future. But I think now we've learned and waken up that, well, we're basically now in a big new turmoil, both in Europe as well as globally, and peace might not be in the cards. Have we prepared the systems in a way that these sinister ways of using our society's openness to different kinds of apps and platforms cannot be used by hostile governments? At this moment, the answer is no. I would think of 2 or 3 currently quite wildly popular apps that, given specific crisis scenarios, can be very much turned against us. And I think we've not done much about it. The other thing that I want to also touch briefly is that Minister pointed to the future of 2030. I have just one issue with that. I'm not sure the smartphone in the way and form is there in 2030. And that is one of those other things that we have to contemplate, is that, like, for 10 years, well, who knows better than Finland when Nokia missed the smartphone evolution, but 10 years give and take, the smartphone is the key driver of all of those in exchanges between society and information. But it is increasingly believed it is about to phase out. Sooner or later is wild to guess. And whether that will be exactly Mark Zuckerberg's metaverse is not fully sure, but the fact that AR and VR would be the new key drivers in the way we kind of network on how we interact with the digital is basically, I think, pretty much clear. So there is a new stage of development of our way we interact with the internet and digital space and receive information. And if the smartphone-based social media created issues, imagine when we wear these AR glasses where physical is the same picture was digital for the brain. We've been pretty hard-pressed to tell fact from fiction in the smartphone reality. Think in the terms of getting the same picture for the brain. And imagine if the same manipulation ecosystem is transformed into these new technologies. That is where I think we have a lot of work to do. and not to mention virtual reality. Imagine the ecosystem of manipulation being transformed into the virtual reality. Imagine if part of the metaverse is run by the authoritarian states-controlled companies that at some point we might find ourselves at conflict with. How would be our ability to create resilience of the society? And I know in Finland you're kind of, as a default, relying on your societal resilience is world class, I do agree. But with these technologies going in the wrong way, you might find yourself in a different place. Because these normal interactions of the social fabric that you always relied on and what was the basis for your resilience might not be as effective anymore. For that, one thing we have to, and this is one key area where we have to say, we have to be prepared for the next wave, not to repeat the mistakes we've done with social media, and that is, we have a technology, we think it's very kind of neutral, and then we suddenly find out, oh, it had created all of those effects. No, we have to start to do something about it. With a new incoming technology, we have to be better prepared and start regulating the space before it becomes really impactful. The other point I want to raise is when I looked at the very recently released US national security strategy, and I think for those who have not read is worth the read, because I think it's really kind of looking at the new trends as well. One thing that I fully agree, and I want to emphasize here, we are in this, basically one of the things also I have to say, I was with UC here last December, was a visit, was meeting a lot of people, and today when we talked, we said how quickly history changes, because back in December I never thought, nobody thought that Finland is about to join NATO. So we are in this moment of history where a lot of things are packed in a very short period of time. 88, 91 for the point of reference. But one of that thing that I think this national security strategy says, we're setting into the times when yet again there is going to be competition / conflict of systems, authoritarian versus democratic. And in my view, the war in Ukraine, Russia's war in Ukraine, is just an opening act of it. I for instance, don't think that the closure will be when the Ukraine wins. It will be opening for the second act. But we're going to see, I'm afraid. But the whole point on that new US national security strategy is that big battlefield between these systems will be the emerging technologies. AI, big data, quantum computing, biotechnology. What kind of value sets will be supported within these technologies? What kind of values will be inbuilt in these technologies? So in a way, I would argue, also, the development of these technologies, although indirectly, is a place of a battle. So not only to be economically more advanced, to have an economic edge, we have to think as West, as EU, as a region, as a nation, that investing in these emerging technologies is also about winning this conflict of systems. And that is another area. So as my last 10 minutes are coming, I want to talk a little bit about what to do. What to do in these circumstances, how to prepare best for what is to come. First, I think we have to be able to tell what is happening. For instance, my question that I raised with you, do you know what happens with your societal data? Who gets access to it? For what reason? How it is being used? Is there a good answer? In most of the countries that I know of, there's not. And given that data is such a powerful factor today, but increasingly in the future, I find that unsatisfactory. I'm not against the use of big data. It is part of the kind of delivering the innovation and progress. But we have to ensure that is used for good rather than bad. Our experiment told us somebody can be as is shopping for a valuable data on Finnish society. And you might not know, for very, very malign purposes. So understanding what is happening. And also the understanding that the typical kind of government approach, and I used to work many years in the government of Latvia, is that what is valuable is the secret government information. But as we do experimentation, in fact, we find out if you zoom out enough into the big data or metadata space and you have a capacity to understand that data, it actually tends to be even more valuable. But that's not the systems how we build to protect it. And that is something I would suggest we start doing right now. Second question I ask always, and probably in this crowd that would be a much easier answer, but I always plea to have the experts of these technologies that are important in the teams. Big data, AI experts as part of a team, both on the information side, but also on the cyber side. And most of the places, I hope they are joint teams, because you need to have that joint approach to be able to deal with that. And also, extremely importantly, when the policy decisions, strategic decisions are being made, you have to have these people at a table to be able to do the kind of adequate decision. I'm not even saying right decision, but adequate decision. And there's been a rise of a number of those people employed, but we all know the problem. It's so hard for the government or agencies to get these people on board because the pay and the possibilities outside are so much more tempting. But that doesn't help. We have to have that expertise as a part of a team. The third point, and also basically that thinking drives very much from what I've seen in the war, and also what you alluded to, this cyber army. But apart from this IT army kind of approach, I would take it a step beyond. And that is, in these kind of realities, network is that matters. And network beats hierarchical approach. And I've seen that both in the information space in Ukraine, as well as in the pure cyber activity, where citizens bought in and were ready to support the nation. Like say, every Ukrainian with a little bit of skill is either, or both, information and cyber warrior. Not because of, some kind of structural affiliation, etc., because they're ready to go and fight in ways possible. And that is where, if we believe that idea that we are impeding conflict and competition of systems, the authoritarianism can never afford. Network doesn't work in an authoritarian system. It's all about hierarchical control. So in a way, in these networks of systems that we're developing, and we're going to continue to develop. And of course, the question is, whether AI will fundamentally shift any of that, but it's not in the immediate future, obviously, is that creating networks. And I think for Finland, you're very well placed with your comprehensive societal approach to the issues, but actually focusing more on creating these networks is really important. And the idea is that the kind of society has, as society, not only the obligation to be part of the military conscription and reserve, but the society in the same way has an obligation to be able to defend the information and cyberspace. And in fact, to think more about how to conceptualize and implement in more a kind of structural approach to enable that network to function, not to impede with that, but to enable it to function. Fourth point. Fourth point is regulatory. Yes, back to the very boring theme. That is, as these technologies evolve, we should not come with this idea that, and I think that has been a mistake. Yes, there is a point in having very free approach, like innovate, create, no strings attached. But at some point, as things become really important with the societies, you have to understand what are the rules of the game. And that is where I think, instead of looking back and now trying to fix social media that is about to go out and not yet doing a very good job at it, we have to really more look at the kind of front technologies and think and concentrate on what are the rules. And I recognize it doesn't mean like going full EU into that, like every prescriptive move has to be outlined, but more on a kind of regulatory, kind of principle level. What is and how we believe that can coexist and will strengthen the democratic individual rights approach versus any other. And last piece, also always very important, is train as you're going to fight. This is really kind of very evident from any military in the room, but also that is the point I'm saying. The dictatorship of a habit. We are creatures of a habit, and that is where we miss the new trend. And that is my challenge to everyone. Every time you go back to training, think what has changed in the landscape. How technology brought in any new reality that we have to bring into our training, so we are realistically training as we will be fighting. Because, as I've said, it's so easy to slip into the established routes of how we've done. And then in 5 years we see, wow, the technology is an absolutely different place. And we've trained like only 25% of what is realistically necessary to be trained. And that means, which is my final thought, let's keep an optimistic open mind. I think open mind and ability to innovate, to trust ourselves, to be able to innovate and come up with the solutions is what is the ultimate strength in the societies like ours. And that is why I think we will be at the right end of history, and we will also win that fight. With that, thank you very much.